Howdy folks, old Buster coming to you again with another story. I know that last one was a doozy, but this kind of follows up with it a little bit. Name of this story is Another World, Just a Visiting. Well, in response to the events in Israel, Admiral Hannibal Patton Coulter stated that there are 5 other videos taken from a distance showing the event in disarming the nuclear device at the dome in Iraq. Now listen folks, y'all may not want to hear this, but this was on the YouTube and the TV and all kinds of witnesses to this, and this came to us from the feller, of course that's not his real name, Admiral Hannibal Patton Coulter, but we know the feller. He talks to us. So whether he's full of it or not, I can't tell you that, but you know, I wasn't flying in any spaceship. But what I am telling you is that stuff is true that people tell us or we hear or whatever. So we didn't make it up. So I'm going to finish reading all this stuff to you because we got more stories coming that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with that. But anyway, this is part of everything. The boys is always getting into some kind of mess. They don't even know what they're getting into half the time. Well, if you Google Jerusalem UFO, you will see our actual flight, he said. I had no idea we was being filmed. I was too busy concentrating on the task at hand and worrying about outside interferences. David and I, that's the feller that helps him co-pilot, he said, was both sweating profusely when we finished the task. I am amazed at the critics' comments, he said. Every one of them is nonsensical. It would take a major Hollywood production team and effort to create a UFO and film it like this amateur photographer did. Or photographer, I'm sorry. My pronunciation ain't too good today, I reckon. Well, by the way, the craft I was flying is about 60 feet diameter instead of the amateurish comments of it being 18 to 20 feet in diameter. That small of a craft would not be able to house the electronics involved, the propulsion system, let alone a crew of 2. Well, folks, I can't say that I've been there, seen it and whatnot, but Walter has. Now, Walter can tell you he's seen the darn thing. They ain't got to fly in it, but he got to see it. I will not try to explain the glowing light on the bottom for security purposes. Now, when the boys say they seen something, or heard something, or read something, or somebody told them something, it's for truth. It ain't somebody lying. They'd take the polygraph on it, they said. The bright flash of light was when we fried the electrical systems that powered the bomb's firing mechanism. The firing mechanism had already been disabled by our computers and electronics, stated Admiral Coulter. Now, this stuff I'm reading here come directly from him on the email. So don't say I dreamed this up. I ain't dreamed this up, but I'll go on to tell you some things I did dream up, but this ain't none of it. Now the Admiral went on to say, I do not know the significance of the monk and the keys in one of the other videos. Lord have mercy. Perhaps that was added to increase the mysticism of the video. The illegal or something supposed to be Jerusalem, I guess Hebrew talk, it means illegal. The illegal guy is apparently, or maybe that's some kind of handle he's got, I don't know, a constant YouTuber. Now, Admiral Coulter then referred to a memo he sent to Mr. Holmes that said, there is much alien activity in the picnic area. We are constantly monitoring what is going on all over the western U.S. of A. Now, folks, I want to explainify this to you. This is Buster. This is me. And Walter own that land up there, 160 acres, outside of Vernal, Utah. And it ain't never been owned but one other person. I think it gave them to him from some German czar guy or something a long time ago got it. And then the lady that had it died and we bought it. A goat couldn't live on it and pay too much money for it, but we still bought it. And this is what they're telling us. They're flying over our property up there. Of course, one for all and all for one is the way the boys are. So just cause me and Walter on it don't mean that Jesse and Hire's not in it. And they've been there and done that too. They've seen this stuff happen all around them. I tell you, it's plumb crazy. GPS is going crazy, and the cameras and the watches don't work, and I mean all kinds of nonsense, and all that weather stuff, and things are going and jumping. Anyway, I'm just reading this to you now. Now, you may not think this fits with the boys in the early days, and it seems like maybe it don't, but it does, because from when they growed up to where they got to as adults, they've been in every which kind of thing known to man. And them boys ain't no dumb bunnies either. They invent things, and Walter even invented the thing for NASA. Big Mike Young did it for the helicopters in Vietnam. Buster for the chicken pluckers. Tyson, well, it was an electrical thing, so they wouldn't get electrocuted. And Hired's always inventing the pullers and things and stuff in the dirt work. They're always doing something, whatever they're into. They don't do it half-baked. So I just want y'all to know that if you ever want to email me, call me, talk to me, you welcome to do it. Anyway, that property up there, we got all them pictures up there that they wrote and stuff that the Indians say came from these people. I don't know, but it's there. The dinosaurs, they got everything up there. Continuing on. There's a malevolent group that is cooperating with the Illuminati. Now this Illuminati group is for true too, and doing damage to the planet with huge ships and powerful weapon systems. The Japan earthquakes are the current results. I fear the U.S. is the next target. Well, many thought that HAARP was the cause, but it was not. We had been monitoring it. I had warned Bob Gates when he was Secretary of Defense a few months ago that we would not tolerate the use of HAARP for destructive purposes. We melted one of their towers to prove the point. I received a phone call from him the next day begging us not to destroy it. Well, folks, you'll just have to forgive me here. I hate that I didn't have my telephone off, but it's off now, and I told you we ain't professional around here. We're just trying to read our little stories and whatnot. And sometimes folks want to call. I guess they want to know about this. That's why they're calling now. Ain't nothing perfect about this. You just get what you get when you look at me reading these stories. Anyhow, I promised him we would not if it was not used for destructive purposes. Wouldn't melt any more of them, I guess. He promised they would not anymore, and so far has kept his word. The malevolent group of aliens are about to be dealt with. Now, folks, I know everything we growed up with, and we ain't never heard such stuff as this. I hadn't when I was a youngin' neither. But, like I told you, these are folks telling us this stuff. Now, I'm not trying to justify nothing. I'm just trying to tell you what the truth of the matter is, and then you can take it with a grain of salt however you want to take it. Anyway, this comes from, now this is not the real feller's name. I can tell you the real feller's name, but this is what part of it is. Hannibal Patton Coulter, Admiral, United Galactic Federation of the Galaxy of Hendon, Commander, Project Alliance. Now that part's true. All that stuff about the Federation and the Project, all that stuff is true. Come from them. Well, ladies and gentlemen, equipped to Admiral Coulter, I share these thoughts and facts with you in order to orient you to the imminent danger that lies ahead. We are embarking on a quest to save all of the worlds that cherish freedom and God. It just so happens that the only way to do this is to fight. Well, he went on to talk about these Tesla domes. Now, you know that Tesla feller was one smart bird. And about these scalar waves, he said that's where it comes from Chernobyl. He said cell phones, they come from the aliens. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what they say. And one of our friends was a scientist, he's dead now, and that Area 51 said that. Anyway, these aliens were jumping around there, and all these different kinds of them, said they finally heard them talking about the Federation spacecraft that happens every day and night. And he said he was sorry the Earth isn't informed. Admiral Coulter told the group. Well, after a lively discussion, all the group began to turn in. They was just plumb tuckered out at trying to get their minds around about all they done here. Now, you can imagine that. Well, I hired up and said with a grin that he was going to learn how to fly one of them darn UFO spaceships. Now, that'd be just like him. Even if it had hair-lipped the ugly ape. He just couldn't wait till morning. The aldermate turned to the boys and said, "What you going to do with him?" And followed Howard on out to their sleeping quarters. Now, it didn't seem like no time at all till everybody was rousted out of their bunks and told to get on ready, because they was in Gimbal. That's another planet, you know. There's 574 of them in there. Well, Admiral Coulter introduced all the boys and guests to Karen and her ma and Pa and Ken. It was quite the breakfast for sure, but no meat and taters, with the boys winking at one another and grinning because there wasn't no steak for Walter and a pound of bacon for Buster. But it was fine fare nonetheless. Well, after eating their fill, a tour was given to all the group, and then the boys split from off of the, or split, not split, they split on off from the women folk and began to learn about the planet. At home, it would have took dang near a year to get to all the places to see what all was geared up for them, but on Gimbal only took the afternoon. The gals all got to see sights they ain't never imagined and was plumb took with Karen. Now, his fiancée for real life was Karen, according to him, and being on that planet. Now, the boys, they ain't been to no planet, you know that. But this stuff is told to us. One of us, all of us, some of us, whatever. I told you some of these stories were all true, some were some true, and some I put in my writing in there, which this is part of it, but this stuff about all that other carrying on is for real. And I got the proof on it, as far as from what they say. Well, old Butch and Sheena Marie was put up in the fanciest of digs. Lord have mercy. And the gals all got to see sights they ain't never imagined was plumb took with this gal Karen. And now old Sheena Marie and Butch, they got a honeymoon suite, they go, I think we'd probably call it. And that, as much as a body could ever wish for. They was pretty much left in the care of the folks to lend them a hand in having the time of their life. But 2 days' time found old Butch plumb tuckered out, but a raring to get on to learn to fly one of them spaceships with Hart. Now, Sheena Marie knowed she was going to have to hog-tie Butch if she was going to keep him around much longer. Excuse me. Now, them 2 days was like a month of their time on Earth, so they couldn't say they didn't have no time alone. Now, that darn bulldog now done made eyes at one of the captain's gals, Princess Preety. And she sure enough took a shine to him, too. Now, that Captain Kalon had a mite of a settee with Bulldog to see if his mind was right. The captain had to set the record straight the way things was done up here on Gimbal and Mignar. You see, Captain Kalon was from the house of Kalon that was royalty in this neck of the woods. Now, the captain was a hay knocker for sure, for security for the council, and that wasn't no small position. Them 2 days of courting was like heaven, Bulldog said to the captain, and he sure enough cottoned to his gal. The captain asked Bulldog if he was willing to live on the planet Mignar and abide by their way of life. Now, you got all these cultures going on. Old Admiral Coulter had to do that too. Now, Bulldog was honest about what he told the captain, told him it would take a mite of doing to get used to the life on their planet, but he figured he'd study on it and give him his answer before they left on out of there. Now, the captain told Bulldog that was fair enough, but not to get in too deep because there wasn't no going back if he did. You know, a lot of cultures, these folks old school. Just like my people come from Czechoslovakia, they wasn't no messing around like all that and divorcing and carrying on. You done what you done and you kept your word. Well, now old Steve got into the innards of machines he ain't never seen the like of, and Sandra June found some ladies and taught them how to play cards and work puzzles. Now she's in hog heaven too, I tell you. Now Monique and Lulu and Luann and Alma Mae was taking in the shopping they had. Reckon that wasn't no different than back home, just different stuff. Now the boys was seeing the defense systems and military hardware along with Dalton and Devane when they see the feller they knowed. Danged if it wasn't Ronald Richkoff. Danged if and that wasn't a surprise to the boys. What's he doing there? Well, after telling how he got to Skinny on what all was a-happening at Crow Creek, they really got down to chewing the rag. Old Ronald done showed his true colors and was one of the good guys. Now, back in the early days, Ronald didn't know come from Sikkim as to who flung the chump, but that was settled way back when. Now, none of the boys had heard hiding their hair for old Ronald since that time at Crow Creek. You know, that's when they went down in that cave and all that, and they was fighting them fellers. But found out he had been helping out Admiral Coulter ever since then and had communicated with Mr. Holmes right often. Well, the boys had the measure of the man after the tussle they was in at Crow Creek. Ronald due to ride the river with, for sure. Now, Admiral Coulter then told the boys and the rest of the group he had spent some time around the picnic area last night after receiving reports from two of his squadrons that they had observed unusual activity there this week. They had observed 7 cylinder-type spacecraft around the area, with 2 of them hovering over the drilling site. They was shining spotlights all around the area like they was trying to find something. Now, what appeared to be a white electrical-type beam shot from one of them and entered the ground over the drilling hole. Now, that went on for approximately 30 seconds, he said, and then a blue-type beam come from the other craft into the same site. And that went on for about 2 minutes. At that time, electrical pulses come out the site and began to dance around about a 100 feet diameter area. It appeared to be the same type that they had observed before. The electrical pulses was like small lightning bolts or extreme static electricity. The 2 cylinder craft began to glow a bright red color. Now, this whole process lasted about 30 minutes and then it stopped. The cylinder craft rejoined their comrades who was waiting at about 2,000 foot up in altitude. His squadrons encircled the 7 cylinders and uncloaked. Man, we talking Star Trek here. I guess it scared the stuffings out of them, and they tried to get away. They chased them all the way to the North Pole, firing an occasional particle beam across their bows just for the fun of it. They kept going into northern Siberia, where they went into an underground base. The Admiral squadrons broke off and went on their way then. The Admiral landed at the site last night and walked around the area with his crew. They had radiological instruments with them, and there was a slight trace of radioactivity but no dangerous levels. Their instruments seem to indicate there is something at between 150 and 200 foot or greater depth. I don't know if it's reachable with your type of drilling rigs or not, he said. It may be uranium or other radioactive metal or something buried by alien civilizations from the past. The cost of reaching it may be too extreme to proceed further. Now, folks, I know I'm doing a lot of explainifying here, but the boys been on that property all over the place. There's all kinds of stories about it. There's skinwalkers. The government's got stuff fenced 12 foot high all around it. You got, like I was telling you before, people seeing the deputy sheriff seeing it, and people living there seeing the Sasquatch and the alien craft coming out of the lake there at Bottle Lake and all that. The reason the boys bought that property was this. There was supposed to have been some Aztec treasure come up through there, and a guy named Mel Fisher that found the Etosha treasure ship out there in the ocean died up there looking for it. And we had one of the government, they call them old sensors, viewers, remote viewers, fella, and in fact he's a fella that found the Noah's Ark, they said. He was on TV. That did a remote viewing, and then they had satellite and all that stuff, showed this trail where they come up with all them donkeys and whatnot carrying that gold and stuff. And supposedly the Indians had done hid some of that stuff and knew where it was too. And that's why the Indians didn't want us up there fooling around. But it was more than that. There's all this other stuff going up there, but these spacecraft and aliens and all that stuff. And I'm telling you, the boys didn't know come from Sikkim of what was happening up there, or neither Adams off Ox either, because they just got something just looking to see if there's a nickel in it. So, you think I'm lying about this, but these stories are almost 100% true, except for me doing a little embellishing the writing and whatnot. So I hope y'all take this with a grain of salt, but do believe that what I'm telling you is not something that come out of my brain. This is what people have told us, things we've seen, everything. And these Indians have got the legend. Well, my word, we found a little cave back in there and found some beads that you never seen such a bead. How did it get there? Thousands of them. Under where there had been fire pits and stuff. Me and Lulu sit there and seined them through a screen for days. I mean, there's all kinds of things up in there. You had pies and things where they had paper and porcupine quills that they pies so people wouldn't reach up in there and whatnot. Oh, they found holes in the air shafts down in there in that mountain. Oh, and that's all true. All true. So, well, I just want you to know all that. That you think I'm lying, but anyhow, I'm going to go on and read all this stuff. Now, a lot of this stuff that's not my writing, you can tell, but it comes straight from these folks on the email or talking or whatever. Our particle beams can melt a hole, but it will become molten rock or metal and destroy the site. It could also damage anything buried there. I do not have a solution at present. I will continue to research other alternatives, said the Admiral. We have constantly encountered the same large crafts, approximately 1 mile in length, that I told you about before. They look similar to the Stargate Universe craft, if you ever watched their shows on the Sci-Fi Channel. One attacked my squadron this week when we was en route to the Alliance, and we had to fight back. We have modified our shields with about 100% greater capacity since all the attacks have started. Apparently, that is all that saved us from their blast. We split up and engaged in combat. We had set all of our computers to all fire at the same time. We hit the command and control section with 8 blasts from different directions at all the same time. Their shields was not strong enough and our beams caused the craft to explode. I did not sleep for 3 nights after seeing the amount of deaths we caused. There was bodies scattered and floating in space for hundreds of miles around the explosion area. I estimate at least 1,000 crew members were killed. Of course, they're bad folks, but they still bothers them. They ain't into killing business and defending themselves. They had to. Well, we all went back to the Alliance, and I had to meet with my crews for a debriefing. We all cried and lamented for about an hour. The carnage was horrific. I had to minister to all of the young pilots, navigators, engineers, and scientists who was aboard our crafts. They are all godly Christians. We all prayed and repented before the Lord for the action we had to take, and some of them felt a little better. The young women crew members was affected worse than anybody, I think, he said. They cried and cried after seeing all the dead bodies of blonde-haired men and women that we had to kill. I talked, preached, taught, and wept with them until they all were somewhat calm. I don't think any of us will ever be the same. You see, these folks all are Christian people, according to him, and they're not into the killing, but they had to defend themselves. Well, I told all of them that they could take as much leave time as necessary to find their peace with the Lord. Many of them came up to me last night and hugged me and thanked me for the counseling. They said they felt better and was ready to continue to carry on our mission at whatever cost. These are the type and caliber of people I have the pleasure of serving with. Any of the 26,000 under my immediate command and the other 6,000 under my supervisory command would gladly give their lives to see this planet and solar system turn to the Lord and change into a God-fearing and righteous people. I feel so honored to serve with them. I have never experienced in all of my military and intelligence work a people so dedicated and courageous as these young men and women of Project Alliance. I am especially honored to be their commander. Well, after hearing that report, Admiral Coulter said that they was to have a meeting with the council that evening and had better get on back and have supper and get ready for a briefing. At 7 p.m., the council meeting cranked up with a bang. A gavel about the size of a poleaxe was wielded with this old feller, and sure enough got everybody's attention when he hammered it down and banged at the top of that desk. There was 12 Hayde knockers running the show, but a representative of all the 574 planets in the United Galactic Federation was in the room. One heck of a gathering. It was, said Buster, but that ain't even the half of it. There sure are some funny-looking fellers around here, and I reckon some of them are gals. He didn't rightly know. And he said you wouldn't either. Well, Jesse just grinned at Buster and told him he reckoned we'd all figure it all out sooner or later. Well, Buster asked Jesse if he was reading him right or not. What you mean, said Jesse. I mean just this. I know them wheels of yourn is spinning like crazy in your hay. It sure enough has got to do with business now, don't it, said Buster. Well, I do have an idea or two, he whispered low-like to Buster. You just know me too well, Buster. Well, old Buster just guffawed and punched Walter in the ribs and told him we was going to have some doings yet with this bunch before it was all over with, because Jesse ain't about to let an opportunity like this get by him. Well, Howard said to Jesse to make him enough of money for one of them spaceships. He wanted one. He just had to have one. Lord of mercy, Howard, ain't you never satisfied, asked Walter. Well, I ain't no worse than y'all, so don't fret me none about it, he said. The Admiral guided the boys to their seats and then introduced all to the gathering. The entire council welcomed the boys along with Dalton and Devane. Then the Hayde man, his name was Taga, that's T-A-A-G-A, I don't know where to get that, asked the different divisions to report on the situation in the galaxy. Well, one by one, each commander gave his report of what all was going on and what had been done under his command. There was one supreme commander from the planet Gimbal, 4 quadrant commanders from the planets of Balqui, Satara, Batar, and Cuepca, C-U-E-P-C-A, and they each had 8 division commanders. There was a total of 1 supreme commander, 4 quadrant commanders, 32 division commanders, and each one of them had 4 area commanders representing all 574 planets. Not all the commanders give a report, but for the most part, the 4 quadrant commanders each give their report for their quadrant, with the exception of one feller that was an area commander in quadrant 2. That's a lot of talking there, but they was all telling what all was going on, and makes my head swim a little. Now, believe it or not, the feller's name was Earl. Leastwise, it sounded like Earl to the boys. Dalton said he thought it was pronounced R-L. Now, his report was a doozy, I'm telling you. Not only was he an area commander, he was our ace warrior pilot and soldier. The man was bowed up for sure now, not an ounce of fat on that boy. He'd have been a heck to tussle with in the alley. Well, he began to tell all about the threat to the Alliance and the United Galactic Federation and how the Illuminati was involved with them. He said that he had information that proved that this diabolical group led by the Lazarians was actually controlled by the Archons and had conquered several galaxies and had their sights set on taking over theirs. Well, I'm going to stop here and tell you another little piece of this story. These lizards are supposed to be these aliens, and Roddy Piper was that movie a long time ago with those glasses where you could see them. But there's people we've interviewed. My son and I. We've interviewed people that been with them, had them, told all about these lizards. Who they ate and what they did, and had children with hurt people, and it's just a mess. There in Utah, underground, I mean, it's amazing what you hear from people when you start hearing this stuff. And it's, can everybody be nuts about this? Are they all nuts or what? But I don't know. All I can tell you is, and report to you, is what I know. And all this lingo, me talking about this stuff up there, come from somebody. Now, I put in mine about, You know, the boys and the gals and up there with it and all that, they ain't been there. But all that other stuff's for true, I told you. Now, you can believe it or not. Like I say, you can just call old Buster or write him at bustertheboys@yahoo.com, and I'll certainly share all of it with you. Well, anyway, he began to tell about that threat. No, he said he had the information that proved that this diabolical group led by the Lazarians that was controlled by the Archons had conquered all these galaxies and had their sights set on taking over theirs, and that includes Earth. The Lazarians was ruthless and was just pawns for the Archons. Now, they were even worse than them, but they was using the Lazarians. They had no mercy. Relent and be slaves or perish. Them boys just didn't care much which you did, one way or t'other. Now, them Lazarians would pluck a feller's eyes out whilst he was still a-breathing and eat 'em right on the spot. Meaner than a snake and kin to boot. Them Lazarians stunk to high heaven so's the gag of gopher was twice as ugly. Now, Area Commander Earl sure enough got Dalton and Devane's attention with what all he had to say. This is big news. Dalton stood up and asked to have permission to speak, and Tagaa gave it to him. Well, Dalton asked Commander Earl just what was his opinion of what all was coming up. Now, Commander Earl asked Tagaa if he could speak frankly, and he was granted permission to answer in any manner he seemed fitting. Well, Commander Earl flat out said that the Alliance and the United Galactic Federation needed to be prepared for war, and that he felt attack was imminent and would be immediate. Well, excuse me, that's a lot to swallow. Hard data did not show that attack would be very soon, but only the possibility existed. However, Commander Earl said he had been a-fooling with these here jaybirds for a spell and knowed how they made war on planets. The council of all 574 planets got in a sure enough uproar over what the commander was saying, and folks was a-popping up and down out of their seats like a Mexican jumping bean. Well, old Tagaa finally got some order and asked for a vote on taking the fight to the Archons and Lazarians. By and large, excuse me, the majority just wouldn't believe that they could or would be attacked, and the vote cast was to wait and see what all happened. Does that sound like our politicians here? Won't listen, nobody's got some sense. Well, after the meeting adjourned, Tagaa left out to his chambers and called for the Area Commander Earl, Captain Kahlon, Admiral Coulter, Dalton Devane, and the boys to meet him there in 1 hour in his chambers. Well, Walter said that it pretty near looked like the fat was in the fire and fur was going to fly. For his part, he stood by what Commander Earl said. Now, all the boys and Dalton and Devane agreed with Walter on that and began to discuss what the meeting with Tagaa was going to be about. Well, they talked about everything from Tagaa sending them back to hunkering down on Gimbo. Well, all of them that was called to the meeting met straight up in 60 minutes. Tagaa and Captain Kahlon was already seated when they was announced and asked to have a seat. Well, you know, he's a head bird, that Tagaa. Old Tagaa got right on down to the nut cutting, tell you. He wanted to a man their opinion of what all Commander Earl had to say. Then he asked Commander Earl to give his recommendation of what all he would do to secure the safety of the Alliance and the United Galactic Federation. He said to take the fight to him. And Tagaa asked if there was time to reconnoiter the outer perimeter in deep space to see if they could spot any activity. Well, Area Commander Earl advised Tagaa to let him take a force to the far distant quadrant that was directly opposite of the Lazarians and the Archons. Why? Asked Tagaa. There are indications to me that the Lazarians are going to outflank us, and Archons are going to attack just opposite of them in a pincher movement, stated Commander Earl. Well, Tagaa exclaimed that the Archons and Lazarians have never been known to have even traveled in Galaxy X-77, let alone have forces in that area. Well, Commander Earl said he just knowed they would attack in that manner. Wouldn't you if you had the chance of a complete victory, he said? Well, Commander Earl said he felt like the Lazarians had mounted a build-up long time ago and just waited around till the timing was right. He also stated that their defense installations was remote and so far off even communications took hours if not days depending on solar and space conditions. Now, all communications had to go through relay stations and they experienced all type of problems on a frequent basis. Well, Ty sat there for a spell with his thinking cap on and not a word was uttered in the room. Then Ty looked up and gave the order with a very grave look on his face. Now, Harry, Commander Earl, he said, you have permission to mount a force to Galaxy X-77, but Captain Kalon will take the majority of our fleet towards planet Lazaria. Gentlemen, you may pick your teams and depart immediately. Report to me personally as soon as there's any news. Thank you and good luck. Well, sir, everybody got up and got to moving real quick like. The boys in Dalton and Devane all met up in Dalton's quarters for a confab. That palaver with Dalton and Devane come up that they wasn't going to let them fellers go out for a tussle without them. If them buzzards get the best of the Alliance and the Federation, Earth will fall too. We just gotta go, said Devane, and Dalton agreed. Dalton then went to inform Mr. Holmes of what all was a-happening. Well, old Hired piped up and said he was a-going with Commander Earl, and so did Butch. Buster and Jesse said they was a-going too. Now, Bulldog, Steve, and Walter said somebody had to go with Captain Kalon and volunteered to go with him. Well, I know some women ain't going to like this, said Walter. They sure ain't, said Butch, but this is one heck of a pickle we're in, and we got the fight of our lives on our hands. I plumb believe Commander Earl and what he's saying, and he needs some help. Heck fire, the whole existence of Earth is at stake here now, boy, said Jesse. Well, gear up, said Walter. You and Buster get some of our new toys from the General and be ready to move on out in an hour, said Jesse. Well, Buster said he was going to get Jesse's captain bars and the Zambian army uniform for him too, lit out of laughing. We need our captain. Buster hollered back as he rounded the corner heading for the hangar. Well, Dalton saddled up with Commander Earl and Devane hooked up with Captain Kalon after talking to Mr. Holmes. Well, Dalton reported that Mr. Holmes just didn't have much to say about the ruckus to come. There just wasn't nothing he could do. His hands was tied for fighting in space, and it was all in the hands of the Alliance and the Council of the United Galactic Federation now. He wished them all good luck. Well, all the women folk done gathered up at the launch pads telling their men goodbye and knowing this may be the last time they might even see them. Now, as the boys got into their ships and headed on out, tears began to rolling down the gals' cheeks. This fracas ain't nothing like anything they been in before or even could imagine. Well, Hired piloted his own ship with a feller from Commander Earl's squadron. And Butch flew his own too with a feller assigned to him. Now, Buster and Jesse had their own ship and Dalton his'n. Commander Earl and his complement accounted for the 24 fighter ships in the squadrons flying to the outer perimeter of Galaxy X-77. Now, Captain Kalon went along with the remainder of the fleet headed out towards old Lazaria. Bulldog was asked by Captain Kalon to fly with him, and Walter and Steve teamed up in a ship of their own. The fighters was called Warhawks, and it took 2 men to operate it, leastways proper-like. One man could if he had to, but the flying took all the attention of the pilot, whilst the feller in the second seat controlled some of the firing systems and defensive measures. Plus that second set of eyes just plain helped out, you know. The pilot had heads-up displays and could go manual. Now, you know that kind of thing they had with the General. I was talking about this heads-up display. You see it there in front of you and on the visor, and all your mind when you think it does it. And could go manual, but the computer's interface with the pilot's mind and reaction time was pretty near instantaneous. Now, some pilots had the uncanny ability, it was known, to just outfly the systems, but it was a rare breed of man that could do that. Most pilots relied on their computers for flying and fighting. Leastways, that was how they was trained to do it. Excepting fellers like Hired didn't play by the rules when it come to flying. We all know that, don't we? Well, Commander Earl and the squadron made the leap to hyperspace, and at that speed it would take 74 hours to reach their rally point. The fleet would be in contact with the enemy in 80 hours, so the 6-hour spread would be dicey if opposition was found. Communication to the fleet would take at least 5 hours to reach them. That meant there was only an hour window to warn Taga and the fleet if the main attack was coming from Galaxy X-77. The Archons was the ones to watch, and a body just didn't know what to expect from them fellers, but they knowed it to be tricky. They were tricky, folks, and mean, I can't tell you. Communications relay outpost stations was placed throughout the area surrounding the 574 planets in the United Galactic Federation with a buffer zone of 1 million light years on the perimeter. Strategic outpost was manned, but the closest one to Galaxy X-77 took 3 hours for signals to reach it, and then another 3 hours to the main relay station. Now, depending on solar flares and space debris, communication time could be shorter or longer, but most generally it took longer. Conditions really had to be right to shave off 15 minutes at best. The battle cruisers and carriers with the fleet was an awesome force. Each battle cruiser carried 4 squadrons of Warhawks and 4 Falcons. Falcons was older fighters but was piloted by only one person and did not have the weaponry of a Warhawk. But they was fast. Float like a butterfly and sting like a bee, and they sure enough did. Well, believe it or not, carriers not only had 10 squadrons of Warhawks, but 5 Condors. Condors was huge bombers that could deploy enough munitions and bombs to take out South America on Earth. Each carrier also had 50,000 men and their armament and equipment. It took a carrier an hour to slow from hyperspace to make a turn out of a gravitational field. They was plumb huge. The battle cruisers could make it, in about 15 minutes. Well, the fat was in the fire. Commander Earl and the squadron got to their rally point and began to search for any activity and sign of the Archons and Lazarians. Whilst on the way, Commander Earl received communication that the fleet had met with opposition from the Lazarians and was in a fight on a planet on the backside of the Milky Way. The planet was Wayon. Walter said it was named that because it was way on out there. Might have been way legit, you don't know. Commander Earl was ordered to beat feet back to the fleet if he didn't see no sign of trouble from the Archons in 8 hours. Now, Admiral Coulter had sent a synopsis in a report with Jesse and Buster that was eyes only to be shared with the boys. The Admiral and Mr. Holmes was doing some filling in the blanks for them so they'd better understand what and why fur and all this here mess they was in. And this is what it said. The planet is being invaded from other worlds, and that is why the U.S. now has a deep space station and is abandoning the needless NASA space station and the shuttle missions. They discovered this secret many years ago and have only recently learned how to harness these antimatter particles with their back-engineered captured spacecraft and newly built copies of these craft. This is actual fact words that was sent by the government, U.S. government. This ain't no lie. It ain't made up by me. That's an actual statement that can be verified. Well, Mr. Holmes told the boys in the letter to him that the one thing that all the other planets had in common was the need for gold. That is exactly why Earth is targeted. And you boys have the most gold reserves in the world with your mines and private banks for safekeeping. Jesse, Mr. Holmes asked in his letter, please give me and the Admiral as near a total of the gold you hold to date when you get back to the base. Buster looked up at Jesse and whistled. What a story, he exclaimed. Then Buster asked Jesse just how much gold the boys had, or had control of. Well, answered Jesse, with what we have accumulated and what we store for our family and friends, I reckon near on about 7 times what the rest of the world has. Ooh-wee. Buster and the boys all know the hole in the wall where the gold was stored and the security that Mr. Holmes helped them with but none of them ever knowed how much was there. Between Jim Rogers, the Indians, and Wolfe, wasn't nothing going to get past them, that's for sure. The hole in the wall was the best kept secret in the world. With the help of the Admiral and the United Galactic Federation, shields or cloaking devices was installed to make darn sure nobody'd be able to locate their cache of gold. Boys, Buster Loud, reckon we know now why the fat's in the fire. Same old story, ain't it? With the Illuminati and anybody wants what somebody else has got. These here Peckerwoods, they ain't gonna quit till they get the gold and hold all of the planets in the United Galactic Federation hostage and make slaves and meals out of all of us. Well, Jesse said he was right. They had to fight till the last man. What goes round comes round, and the dang Illuminati is right in the middle of the whole shebang. Sure enough, seems like it, said Howard. We gotta make darn sure they ain't in this outer perimeter and trying to sneak up on us first and then hightail it back to help the others if they ain't around here. Well, that's a fact, said Dalton. Well, Commander Earl interrupted and told them they was now at the outer perimeter and to keep their eyes peeled. The two flights split up and began to search the space out there where they was. It was about 35 minutes and one of the pilots, Lieutenant Raal, his name wasn't Earl, it was R-A-A-L, Lieutenant Raal, said he seed an asteroid off to his and right and was going to take a gander at it. Well, Lieutenant Raal was a hot shot for sure, and pilot had met him whilst training and liked the feller. He knowed no fear, and plus he knowed he was good. Well, him and Howard had become rivals in training, but friends too. Howard radioed to him and told him he'd back him up and come round the backside of the asteroid. Whilst they was a-jawing, all the other ships radioed back and reported to Commander Earl that they ain't found there a thing out in the ordinary, out of the ordinary there in space, and was returning to formation with him. Now, the asteroid seemed pretty small as far as asteroids go, but neither Howard, which didn't know much about no asteroid, nor Lieutenant Raal thought too much about it. Out of nowhere come fighters from the Lazarians. Well, Lieutenant Raal called to Howard and told him they was outgunned by them, but they was faster and more maneuverable than them Lazarians. But on the long haul, the Lazarians would overtake them, so to stay in close and fight them. Well, Lieutenant Raal radioed Commander Earl, told him they was in a dogfight with the Lazarians and give their position and they needed help because all hell was breaking loose. Well, all the ships responded immediately and got into the fight. Commander Earl sent a high-speed communication back to the fleet of what all was going on and to be prepared to be attacked from the rear and the flanks from them Archons. Well, him and his squadron would do all they could to hold off the Lazarians and Archons for as long as they could, so as the fleet and the planets and the United Galactic Federation could get prepared for the attack that was hell-bent on to getting them and taking them out. Well, Lieutenant Raal and Howard was lucky not to get hit in the first waves of the Lazarians, and Lieutenant Raal made a run dead center at the Lazarian fighters. Howard joined in and helped scatter them to allow Lieutenant Raal to make his turn and come up behind them. Well, just before his turn, Lieutenant Raal seen something that surely made his hair stand on end, excepting he was bald as a goose egg. The asteroid wasn't no asteroid at all, but an Archon command ship disguised as an asteroid. Well, boy, if that didn't curl their hair. The Archons wasn't going to get their hands dirty a fighting when they didn't have to, and just let the Lazarians do it for them. Well, don't get me wrong, though. Those Archons make the Lazarians seem like angels when it comes to cruelty and fighting, but they was way smarter than the Lazarians and let them barbaric lizards do the fighting for them when they didn't have to. Fact of the matter is, when the Archons was done using the Lazarian, they was going to be eliminated permanently. Well, the fighting was hot and heavy when Buster and Jesse got in the fray. Howard and Lieutenant Raal was giving Lazarians what for when the rest of the squadron joined on in. Now, Lieutenant Raal told all the other pilots how to fight the bigger ships that outgunned them and to go on manual instead of computer flying. Now, the fighters from both sides was buzzing like a bunch of bees, and the fighting was some kind of intense. The squadron was more than holding their own, but was outnumbered something fierce. The squadron was down to 11 ships left out of 24 when Buster got hit. Buster told Jesse to gear up for a bailout and he would fly him as close to Commander Earl as possible to be picked up in a rescue pod. Well, Jesse said he wasn't going to go unless both of them went at the same time. Buster told Jesse there just wasn't no way to do that, and then Buster pulled the ejection lever and put Jesse into space. Buster turned his ship back into a Lazarian fighter that had a bead on Jesse floating in space. Well, just before Buster rammed the Lazarian fighter, he ejected too. The Lazarian fighter vaporized and didn't get a chance to shoot old Jesse. About that time, Hired showed up when he seen what all was a-happened to Buster and Jesse and put out a rescue pod for Buster and hauled him into the belly of his Warhawk. Commander Earl recalled all the Warhawks that was left to form up on him for a leap to hyperspace. In no time flat, the remainder of the squadron was out of the area of fighting and safe for the time being. Well, hidden in a cloud of space dust, Commander Earl took the damage and casualty reports from the remaining Warhawk pilots. All the squadron was accounted for in some way except for Jesse. One of the pilots that was close to Jesse see the Archon ship close in on Jesse and take him aboard. He didn't know what happened to him after that. Well, Commander Earl ordered all the ships to return to the fleet immediately. Well, Buster asked what about Jesse, and the commander said there just wasn't no way to help him right now until they got reinforcements. Well, Buster was fit to be tied, and that was an understatement. Well, Commander Earl said to prepare for the jump to hyperspace as soon as he completed a transmission to the fleet and got intel from a drone he sent out to spy on the asteroid, or the Archon command ship. The drone wasn't going to come back but would send back data and then self-destruct. Well, it only took 15 minutes or so for Commander Earl to get the information and confirmation to what he had to do. At the countdown to the leap to hyperspace, Buster got in a Warhawk with Hired, and when he requested to swap places with Hired's number 2, at the mark, all of the Warhawks engaged to hyperspace. As all the Warhawks leaped to hyperspace, there was one left behind, Buster and Hired. Buster told Hired they was going after Jesse come hell in the high water. Them lizards wasn't going to eat his eyeballs. About that time, another Warhawk pulled up alongside of Hired. It was Lieutenant Ray All, and his in number 2. Lieutenant Ray All said he made the leap to hyperspace but got out and returned because he just knowed Hired and Buster was going to do something crazy like trying to rescue Jesse. And his number 2, Lieutenant Goodall, said he wanted to come along too. Well, Lieutenant Ray All had a recon drone and told Buster and Hired that they would have to devise a plan before they tried to rescue Jesse or it was just plain suicide. Well, Lieutenant Ray All said they would have to bide their time and find an opening to where they could get in and out, but still needed to hit the Archon ship fast as they wasn't going to expect a rescue mission. Jesse slowly opened his eyes and felt the sweat and the blood course down his nose and brow. It was only a few hours since he was captured, but it felt like 100 years to him. The torture had been horrific, but Jesse was tougher than them lizards thought he was, plus he just didn't know nothing. Jesse had been stripped and he felt the blood trickle over the fine hair on his chest and stomach. The sweat burned his eyes and his mouth was dry as a gourd. The tears wasn't nothing to be ashamed about, cause there wasn't no man that could take the torture they was putting on Jesse. The Archons watched as the Lazarians interrogated and tortured Jesse, then walked away. Well, Jesse overheard the Archon leader tell the Lazarian colonel that they could do as they pleased with Jesse now. They got all they was going to get out of him. Well, the Lazarians sent out patrols looking for the Warhawks but found nothing. The Archon leader in his council meeting told him he just couldn't figure out how they got found out. Everything was too carefully planned out. It was just a matter of time before the United Galactic Federation was notified and then prepared for their attack. The attack plan had to be instituted immediately for it to work at all. Well, meanwhile, Lieutenant Ray All got all the information they needed to infiltrate the Archon command ship. The drone found an exhaust opening that was open during the time the Lazarian fighters came in and out. It was going to take some fancy flying and backup to keep any Lizarians from shooting them when they come out. Well, Lieutenant Rayall was going to cover them whilst Hired flew Buster through the hole in the Archon ship. There just wasn't no time like the present. Lizarian fighters was coming in from patrol, and Hired told Buster he was going to thread the needle, so to speak. Well, the Warhawk was cloaked, and when the next batch of Lizarian fighters went in to refuel, Hired made his move. Hired put the Warhawk through the exhaust opening like taking candy from a baby. Well, Lieutenant Rayall stayed cloaked outside and waited for the boys to make their getaway. They had limited time till Lieutenant Rayall was picked up by sensors or the boys was caught inside. Well, Hired set the Warhawk down next to a damaged Lizarian fighter at the back of the launch bay. There was an entrance door next to where Hired parked his cloaked Warhawk, but discovery wasn't going to take long by the Lizarians. Well, Buster got out the Warhawk and ran to the entrance door. As he opened the door, a Lizarian pilot was coming out. Well, Buster grabbed the feller and pert near twisted that lizard's hide plumb off of his neck. He was a big feller, so Buster rolled him up under a tarp near some covered parts. Lord had him out. Now, Buster didn't have a clue where he was. He was winging the whole show of getting Jesse out of there. Buster knowed he had to be quick, though. As luck would have it, Buster heard two Lizarians coming and hid in a closet whilst they passed by. A little storage room, you know. Well, Buster overheard them talking about Jesse being took to the mess hall right about now. Now, Buster had a little firepower on him and a few tricks up his sleeve, too, now. Buster seed which way them Lizarians was going and followed them to the mess hall. When them lizards opened the door, what Buster seed just about turned his stomach inside out. Jesse was strapped to a table, butt naked, and another feller was right beside him on another table. Both men was alive, but not for long. The feller next to Jesse was set upon by the lizards, and they began to eating him alive. Well, four of the lizards started for Jesse just a laughing. Well, Buster went into action then. He pulled his guns and wasted the four on the feller they was eating and began to killing them one by one that was advancing on Jesse. Well, Buster ran out of ammo and reached for his plasma. He had a plasma grenade. He throwed it at the other lizards in the room and went for Jesse. Well, Jesse looked into Buster's eyes with tears of pain running down his cheeks and a blur in his vision. He hoarsely whispered to Buster to leave him and to save himself, cause there just was too many of them lizards. Buster told Jesse he didn't come here just to leave him lay. He wasn't going nowhere without Jesse, come hell and high water. There ain't no bond greater than blood ties and the choice of giving your life for a friend, Buster said under his breath. They either got out of there alive or both of them would die fighting together. Well, Jesse passed out from his torture from them turkey makers, and that was a blessing for him. He was some kind of hurting, that boy was. There was one lizard that was wounded by Buster and one that was unhurt. First off, Buster grabbed the wounded lizard and swung him like a club and got the other lizard off of balance where he fell down. The lizard that was wounded wasn't around long as Buster took off his hide with his pig sticker he brung from Arkansas. Now, the other lizard that fell was back on his feet pronto-like. Him and Buster was at it, hand to hand, just like Buster wanted it. Buster knowed he had to be quick and get Jesse out of there, but he was for sure going to fix this cannibal lizard first. Oh, that lizard caught Buster off guard by hitting him with his tail. Well, Buster was on his feet like a cat and grabbed that tail and pulled the lizard to him. Buster lifted the lizard over his hide and then throwed him across his knee and broke his back, paralyzing him. Then Buster told the lizard if he wanted to eat somebody to eat this and reached in and pulled out the lizard's heart. Old Buster was mad. It is still a beating, and he shoved it in his mouth. Don't reckon you like that too much, do you, lizard? Buster said to the dying lizard. Well, lickety-split, Buster had Jesse over his shoulder and out of there. You would have expected everybody to come a-running, but they didn't. You see, the gun Buster used was one that Mr. Holmes gave him that only shot laser beams and there wasn't no sound to it. The plasma grenade only made a puff sound, so nobody knowed nothing. Now, getting away was something else. Buster had a gun in one hand and was holding on to Jesse with the other, with Jesse over his shoulder. Buster had about 100 yards to get to the launch bay and was pretty near there when he was discovered. Buster killed the first lizard outright and wounded a couple more. They went to a hollering and a screeching, and all hell broke loose as Buster run through the launch bay door. Well, Hired had to uncloak to get Jesse and Buster in the Warhawk, and as Buster put Jesse in the rescue pod in the belly of the Warhawk, Hired opened up with his guns. Still, 2 lizards jumped on Buster and fur was a-flying. Buster got bit and cut some and whacked by one of them lizards' tail, but he finished both of them lizards off in no time flat, as time was right precious right about then. Well, Buster jumped into the Warhawk and Hired took off. Hired said to Buster that he reckoned that there would be more lizards on them than they was. Either way, they was darn lucky and had a guardian angel. The exhaust opening was closing as Hired was about to fly through it. It looked like they wasn't going to make it when all of a sudden the exhaust door was blowed off its hinges. Lieutenant Rayall was Johnny on the spot, that's for sure. Hired hit hyperspace just as he exited the Archon ship with Lieutenant Rayall right behind him. The Lazarians didn't have a chance to catch him as they headed on out to the fleet. Now, Buster was plumb fractious when he told Hired about what all they was going to do to Jesse. The other poor feller was a goner. There wasn't nothing Buster could do to save him. Them lizards was eating the feller's innards and about to do the same to Jesse Darrell if he hadn't got there when he did. He figured the only reason they did, that fella was bigger than Jesse, so they ate him first. But Jesse was in bad shape. Buster got out the first aid kit and patched himself up a bit in the cockpit, but there wasn't much they could do for Jesse till they got him back to the fleet. Luckily, Jesse was passed out from the pain and Hired could put some gas in the rescue pod to keep Jesse out till they got there. Well, Hired Lieutenant Rayall decelerated and landed on one of the medical ships to get Jesse looked after, and Buster patched up. Lieutenant Rayall told Hired and Buster that was one heck of a ride back there. Both boys thanked him and told him they couldn't have done it without his help. Well, Commander Earl got the medical ship about an hour later, had a video conference with Taga, Lieutenant Rayall, and the boys. Taga was thankful everything turned out as well as it did and told Commander Earl that his predictions was correct on the spot on the attack plan of the Archons. The commander was a bit fussy about the boys and Lieutenant Rayall not following orders, but he said he would have done the same. If it hadn't been for Dalton, Commander Earl said to him, none of it, you would have made it back. Well, how's that, said Hired and Buster in unison. Well, my tracking device was locked on each of the remaining fighters, and 3 of them didn't return to the fleet. Whilst y'all was making your getaway, Dalton was fighting off the Lazarians trying to kill you. How in the world he made the leap to hyperspace is a wonder for sure. His and Warhawk has so many holes in it you could use it for a sieve. Buster asked Dalton why he didn't say something about all this before now. Dalton told him with his unusual poker face that they ought to know he wasn't going to let them go back for Jesse without him. Don't you reckon I know y'all boys better than that by now, he said. And then he just grinned. Now, don't that beat all, said Hired. Jesse's going to want to know everything that happened, so be in for telling a tall tale there now, Dalton, said Buster. Well, Lieutenant Rayall offered his thanks to Dalton and told him he wasn't ever going to forget what he done to help him out, to get him out of there alive. Well, after getting cleaned up and outfitted again, the boys took off to see about Jesse. He was awake and woozy, but would be all right after a bit, said the doctor. The torture wasn't no easy a chore to overcome, but the doctor seemed to think Jesse would be in the pink in about a month or 2, but told Buster to take Jesse back home as soon as possible so as he could get his mind clear. Buster told the doc that Monique would get him fixed up proper like back in the swamp, and then on to the mansion in Kentucky. Hired and Buster told Jesse they would be back after a bit and just rest up some. They had to check on Walter. Jesse told Buster to hold up for a second. He wanted to talk to him about something. Well, Howard left on out, and Buster stayed behind. Now, Buster knew Jesse wasn't much on saying too many words or displaying much emotion. So when Jesse began to tell him how much he appreciated Buster saving his life, Buster just up and told Jesse that he would have done the same for him. Well, Jesse told Buster not to say no more and that he wanted to say what he had to say. Well, Jesse said to Buster that he had no greater love for anybody than he did Buster, and nothing would ever come between them. All us boys are brothers, no doubt, and the facts tell us we are all blood kin. But you and me have always had something special between us ever since we was kids, and that ain't never gonna change. Buster leaned over and kissed Jesse's old head and said he knowed that all along, and now he had to get some rest. About that time, a nurse come in and give Jesse another shot to ease him up some, and Jesse fell asleep with Buster holding him in his arms. Now, this ain't to say that none of the boys, Walter, Howard, Jesse, and Buster, wouldn't give their life and all they owned for one another, but Jesse and Buster was the Mutt and Jeff of the group and the first of the group to get together. Reckon each one of the boys had a very special relationship with each other, and their feelings run deep for all of them. Buster would always give all the boys hug-ems and kiss-ems, with Walter squealing like a stuck pig under a gate, and Howard just a-grinning and Jesse a-fussing them out. To say them boys was attached at the hip was an understatement. All their maws and paws and family knowed it, and where there was one, there was the rest of them. Four of them boys, as well as their family and friends, had gone through many a settee of hardship and joy in all the years they'd known each other, and that ain't even the half of it. It sure wasn't going to be the last of them either. Well, Dalton and Butch had made it back and was in the thick of the fighting with Devane. They poured the coal to their warhawks, and the three of them was like whirling dervishes shooting down Lazarian fighters. Devane was on a planet with Captain Kalon, and Bulldog was a sure enough whirlwind of killing them lizards. When Devane had a hay to steam up, there just wasn't no stopping unless you killed him now. Reckon Devane had him a passel of scars from that fight, I tell you. For what all Devane had done in the battle, he would have got himself 4 or 5 medals of honor. Ain't no telling how many lives he saved during that dust-up. There was reports from so many of the soldiers and their commanders, the body just couldn't count them all. Walter and Steve see their part of the action and limped into the carrier with damages to their ship, but was unhurt. Walter and Steve skunked some hides for shore. Now, Walter backed up Dalton whilst he was attacking one of the Archon command ships, and it allowed the fleet to take out the lead command ship, and that turned the tide of the fight. The Archons turned tail and lit a shuck getting out of there now. They just didn't know what hit them. The attack on the Alliance and the United Galactic Federation was repelled, and it left the Archons scratching their heads in a wide field. The Federation sure enough learned a lesson about the Archons and Lazarians from all this conniving and fighting, and made immediate adjustments on the countering of future attacks. Now, all the gals was plumb tickled pink that the boys was back. Of course, everybody was real concerned about Jesse, but he was coming around real good. But Jesse had a fire in his eye about them Lazarians and Archons now. I'm telling you. He told Dalton he wanted a meeting with Mr. Holmes as soon as possible when they got back. Well, Captain Kalon told everybody about how Bulldog saved his life whilst fighting down on the planet. Them dang lizards had him down and was about to bite his head plumb off when Bulldog tore into him. Well, old Bulldog tackled 2 of them lizards at one time and rolled over on his back with both of his laser pistols just to blast him. He killed them 2 and turned on another and gutted him like a fish with his bowie knife. The captain's troops come up about that time and give them the edge in the fight and save their bacon for shore. But Captain Kalon knowed Bulldog was putting his life on the line for him. Well, after Captain Kalon and Bulldog was on the way back to Gimbal, Bulldog told the captain he done made up his mind and wanted to marry up with Princess Preety, and he'd stay on Gimbal or Mignar, whichever was decided. The captain said he thought that was a right good idea, and it could be arranged for visits, and that they would work out everything. He would welcome to the family. Steve had a dadgum ball if anybody could in the war. All the gadgets and doodads had his and eyes a-popping out of his and Haid and rolled back like window shades. He sure enough wanted to come back, and Sandra June had the women folk working on puzzles and playing cards pretty near every day in a league she'd set up. Well, Butch and Sheena Marie decided to stay on with Bulldog and Princess Preety for a spell till they was settled in, then come on back to Earth. Old Butch done proved himself as a Warhawk pilot, and sure enough made the boys proud in the flying department, especially Hired. He took out 19 of the Lazarian fighters and then decoyed himself when he run out of ammunition. Well, Dalton and Devane was to be rotated out after they had consulted with all the leaders of the United Galactic Federation Council and Admiral Coulter on the alliance as to the course of action needed to be taken and plans made for the future safety of the United Galactic Federation and Earth. Well, that's a long sentence, isn't it? Well, Commander Earl and Lieutenant Rayall both was promoted. Commander Earl was made Vice Admiral under Admiral Coulter, and Lieutenant Rayall was promoted to Colonel and the leader of the 1st Battalion of Defense. His number 2, Lieutenant Goodall, was promoted to Major and under him. Well, it was 2 weeks after the war and everything had settled down a mite when the boys returned home. 3 days there, and Jesse and Monique went on to New Orleans, the way they call it, and on to the swamp. The boys all agreed to meet up at the mansion when Jesse called and said he was ready to talk. Well, Charlie and Caroline had the triplets, and they was keeping them busy this time, but could travel now. They was 3 healthy boys, and Caroline was proud as punch of them boys. I tell you, she had Charlie a-hopping and a-bathing, changing diapers. Charlie was a-taking care of business, but was about wore down and dragging with the young'uns and the business. Charlie had the business making money hand over fist, especially the mines. The general was ready and raring to go whenever the boys was. It pert near seemed that all the group would be getting together as soon as possible. Was healed up and laid by. This message come from advising all the group to be ready to travel at a moment's notice. The message was from Jesse. Reckon things were getting back to normal, except in a phone call from Lulu and Monique to Mr. Holmes. Buster went to a training like there with no Damari and got so bowed up a body could darn near wouldn't recognize him, and Jesse was a-plotting day and night. Not that they wasn't acting right and all, but was sure enough consumed with something. Then Alma May and Lou Ann had coffee with Lulu and Monique and told them about how Hired Walter was acting strange like and wondering if they knowed what was up. The gals wanted to get Mr. Holmes' opinion of what all might be going on. Well, the gals called Mr. Holmes, and he said he didn't rightly know what was going on with the boys, but would call them back by the end of the week and let them know what he found out after checking around a mite bit. It was a Friday afternoon, around about 4 p.m. on July the 3rd, and Mr. Holmes picked up the phone to call Lulu and Monique when his secretary came in with an urgent message. Eyes only. Hiram Holmes. July 4th, 10 a.m. The mansion. Please attend. Meeting extremely imperative. Only 2 reasons not to be there. Jesus and death. Signed, the boys. Well, you folks, hope you enjoyed that story. More to come. This is old Buster going to sign out to you. Y'all have a blessed day. Thank you. Lulu's not here. I got to turn this thing off. Thank you for tuning in.